first session, Investing in First Amendment Challenges today. This is going to be a conversation about philanthropy. And it's a topic, obviously, funding. We've heard enough in our board meeting. We've heard this over and over again in some of our sessions yesterday. Dr. Collier mentioned the discussion with his report that's coming out from Knight, the challenges there as well. And of course, we are supported by a number of these groups for what we're doing and for the coalitions are doing out there. And so certainly this is an area that is very appealing to us as well as important to us. But these philanthropies, you know, they're organizations within themselves. They have missions, and our goal, of course, is to align ourselves with those organizations who share a common interest with us. But as we learned yesterday, that there's this universe out there and all these different galaxies that are still working towards the same kind of goal in terms of transparency and promoting democracy. And so we have a couple of philanthropies up here that are also looking at that galaxy in terms of where their challenges are and how they're seeing their challenges met through the investments that they're making out there within these different galaxies. And so I want to thank our panelists for being here this morning, to traveling here as well. And I want to introduce our moderator, because one of the things that we do when we work with our state coalitions, the host coalitions, is one of the things we like to do is to include local talent and subject matter experts among our panelists in that. And we're fortunate this morning to have with us Matthew Randazzo, who is the Executive Director for the Dallas Foundation. And we appreciate that. And Kelly had suggested, and I went on and read a little bit about Matt and his background and said, you know, this guy has some interest in local government and some government background and that. It fits really well with what we're doing, and of course represents one of those philanthropies out there as well. But Matthew is a native Detroiter, and first in his family to graduate college. His career is focused on improving outcomes for undeserved communities. Matt began his work in politics and public service, but quickly made his way to the education sector, where he spent 15 years working to improve civic education, college access, and STEM readiness. He's also an avid supporter of the Albion College and UT Austin institutions that provided him with a lifelong gift of education and opportunity. Matthew, I'll let you introduce your panelists, but thank you for being here this morning. We appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, y'all. I don't know that I'm a subject matter expert or very talented, but I'll do my best to make this way through the conversation today. We'll invite you to continue to hydrate, caffeinate, satiate, get up and move around during our conversation. How we're going to move into the discussion this morning, I just have a handful of questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists, and ideally we'll have some time left if there are questions in the room. Just as an aside, before we dig in with the panelists, you know, as Dan mentioned, I'm a native Detroiter, and I was that kid that grew up reading the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press every morning. And local journalism has just been such an important part of my work and my career. And in my work in politics, my only claim to fame, I ran one campaign, and it was the campaign that beat Beto's dad in El Paso County. So Beto, as you know, proved to be quite a formidable candidate in this state, and his dad, Pat, was an equally formidable candidate in El Paso 20 years ago. So with that, I'm going to sort of tee up the conversation with each of our panelists, and I'm going to ask them to do a brief bulleted introduction, and then to kick off the conversation by rating, if you will, the overall climate as it relates to open government and press freedom. And I'd love it if you all would share perhaps a bright spot or a pitfall that you're seeing trending either regionally or nationally. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Hi everybody, my name is Nick Swyter. I'm the program associate at Knight Foundation. My portfolio primarily focuses on First Amendment and misinformation. Those two have to work kind of hand in hand today, I'd say. So just a little bit of background on Knight. This is the one strategy area that's been the most consistent throughout the entire history of Knight Foundation. Things will change as the profession changes in journalism, but First Amendment remains the same. So we're committed to this area. Just to tee up on what Matt said, a lot of the pitfalls are quite obvious. We're seeing a lack of local news where it used to be. Stories that used to be longer are compressed to shorter web stories, and that's having an impression on trust in our institutions. Trust in media is very low, and there's many steps that need to happen to restore that trust. And we firmly believe that the place where you restore that is at the local level. Generally, national media is, the trust levels are quite low, but on local media, the trust levels are relatively higher. So that's the opportunity. And we're committed over the next 5 years to double our investments in local journalism and finding models that work to sustain the practice of local journalism. It won't necessarily have to look the same, but we want to make sure that those stories are continue to be told. Some things that are promising, particularly with the freedom of information space, is that we're finding new, I mean, a lot of the work that journalists typically did, because they had the resources, we're finding new ways to do a lot of that work. There's a lot of very good innovators who are leveraging technology in clever ways. We just ran a challenge on artificial intelligence, and 2 of the 7 winners that we used are going to leverage artificial intelligence to take a look at trends in government contracts to be able to categorize massive document dumps. And that's going to do a lot of the legwork that previously had to be done by journalists, and that's going to reduce the costs. Additionally, we're seeing that a lot of newsrooms and citizen organizations are becoming a lot better at working with each other. For example, in Puerto Rico, one of the best stories I saw last year was getting a more accurate death toll after Hurricane Maria. That was a collaborative project between the Associated Press, Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, and Quartz. 3 very distinct organizations that all operate very differently, working together to get to just work together and just dig through documents and requesting documents. And those sort of collaborations have been beneficial. Here in Texas, the Chronicle has done some tremendous work on not only just digging through documents, but requesting them together, so that the burden of paying for that is a lot lighter, and the impact is even larger because you have more folks representing more communities being able to tell that story. So that's where I would say there's some bright spots. Additionally, there's a lot of other groups that are finding ways, citizen groups that are finding ways to do a lot of the legwork that journalists used to do. There's an organization in Chicago-based city called City Bureau that's done a tremendous job of paying people to attend public meetings and write notes. And sometimes those notes aren't going to be huge on engagement, but now we understand that just because it's not getting a lot of clicks, it's not getting likes, it's not getting shares, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Even a single piece of information that you can write down about a public meeting, if no one shows up to the public meeting and you have a piece of information that just says nobody shows up and I can prove that nobody showed up, that's valuable to your community. So even just that one piece of data is tremendously valuable. So we're seeing a lot of organizations that are picking up that work and can support local news and information needs. And there's also just a better recognition that information is power, and that beyond journalists, we all have skin in this game, and we're going to have to work together. And I think that recognition is vastly increased today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Deirdre, tell us a little bit about the Koch Institute and again, pitfalls and bright spots that you're seeing nationally.
I'm Deirdre Hughes. I'm with the Charles Koch Institute. I've been there a little over 2 years. Before that, I have a checkered past as a journalist, from CNN to Yahoo Finance, Fox Business, and some independent work as well. The Charles Koch Institute, we're interested in this space because we recognize the vital importance of openness and the free flow of information to our society. And we also recognize that that free flow of information has been under threat lately from a number of different forces. As Nick mentioned, the decline in local media and communities, and how that's limiting people's access to information, but also the increased polarization and even threats of censorship from the highest office. And we've come out again strongly against terms like enemy of the people, because we believe that has impact on the way people view the media and is not productive. But even in spite of that, there's still encouraging signs, like the Reporters Committee's recent study that 95% of people still believe the free press is absolutely important to our society. So for our organization, we're looking for ways to support this institution, whether that's through efforts in FOIA and increasing access to information, whether that's efforts to support journalism, which we do through a couple of different efforts, which I'm happy to talk about. But you know, our organization is looking for partners who are the experts in the space, who are on the ground, who have the information, and looking for ways to come alongside and support those efforts like we do with NFOIC. But as we heard yesterday, there's a lot of different fronts in this effort. So we look for different opportunities to come at the problem strategically. We also work with the American Society of News Editors to increase tools for journalists to be able to access FOIA and take advantage of that information. We track FOIA at Syracuse. We also work with Knight on the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia that's more focused on litigation. And it seems there's a lot of opportunity. We want to support efforts against SLAPP lawsuits and censorship of journalists, which is a new and disturbing trend we're seeing more and more talk about. And you know, lots of ideas coming out of this conference, and speaking with Dan and Dave about the challenges at the state level, and it seems like that's ripe for opportunity for funders to come alongside some of those partners and look for opportunities to stand up some of those efforts at the local and state level, where as many of the people in this room are journalists, and we know that the best, most compelling stories come from those first-person accounts at the community level. And I see a corollary to the state coalition efforts in really wanting to elevate the stories and examples of how access to records really changed things in different communities and had impact on people's lives in those areas. And then a little more specifically about our organization, of course, we're interested in FOIA for the work that we do. It's essential to our work in criminal justice, getting access to records. It's essential to our efforts in foreign policy, cronyism. It will be in our efforts on immigration going forward. So it's essential there. And we're also interested in, as I said, supporting journalism. We just announced this week a really exciting new partnership for our journalism fellowship program with the Poynter Institute. I'm sure most of you know the Poynter Institute is really the standard bearer for ethics in the industry, and they're coming alongside to partner with us and make that the Poynter Koch Media and Journalism Fellowship. And FOIA has always been a huge part of that program, and we're only hoping to increase that so that young and early career journalists coming up begin their career with an understanding of how they can leverage FOIA, how they can take advantage of that to find critical stories that aren't being told. We work with NPR's senior counsel to teach our media law and First Amendment class there, which of course incorporates some reference to FOIA and examples of how they can do that. And another attorney who works with ASNI, Kevin Goldberg, teaches in that program as well. So those are just some of the ways that we're trying to think about how we can help support efforts in this space.
One could argue that information has never been more democratized than it is today. with internet access and social media and the ability to seemingly, with the click of a button, access any kind of information that you want. And I'm thinking of that idea of democratized information, and I'm juxtaposing that against with other concerns that I heard even just now in this conversation related to secrecy, misinformation, and really pitting media perhaps as an enemy of the people. And so in this era where there is virtually instant access to any piece of data that you would want, why are your institutions and others really protecting some of these First Amendment rights and more specifically open access to information? Doesn't this already exist? Can't we already easily access everything we need to access?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to access information. With that said, it's not always going to be the information that you really need. It's not going to be the information that's necessarily accurate. I think a good example of this is, let's say you have a city council meeting. It's easier than ever to set up a camera, set up audio. They might even be able to be unmanned. You can automate that. You can automate the process so that after the meeting is done, the video will show up online and on a portal. With that said, you can use technology to shine a light, but you can also use it to hide also. I mean, in that example of this city council meeting, the city council members, they could be having a side meeting on their mobile devices. They could be having Slack chats. How do you access that information that they're keeping away from the public eye? And those are all questions that we're going to have to keep on wrangling with, and not just expect that the information will come to us. You still need to fight for that information. And I go back to the story about Puerto Rico. For a long time, the official death toll was 64. But people pushed for that information. They pushed back and said, like, listen, we've done the work. We've seen that it's significantly higher. And the government of Puerto Rico eventually had to just commission a study, and it was ridiculously higher. So you need to push back on the information that is free and readily available. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of things that are free don't tend to be very good. If you go on, I have a Roku, for example, and I take a look at my Netflix content, it's quite good, and then I go to the free channels, and it's like, these are garbage movies. Why would you expect free information to be just as good as stuff that you fight for and put some sort of investment in? Yeah, there's technology that's going to be showcased, but you still need to push back and insist that you get the information that you really need, and that's going to be valuable for your community to make decisions that are better for them and can improve every member of your community.
Yeah, I second all of that. I mean, it's really, we've seen a total sea change and complete change in the paradigm of how news is delivered and consumed. I think the jury's still out on how we're going to deal with that as a society. How a couple of major platforms, Facebook, Google, and others, have really been put in the position of being arbiters of what's news and content. And they don't relish that position. We had the opportunity to take our fellows out there and hear from the heads of the news teams at Google and Facebook and have a really great, challenging discussion, but there are a lot of open questions. They're in the fortunate position of having their own First Amendment protections because of that 90s law that says posters are responsible for what they ultimately post on those platforms. And I don't think we want to go down the road of making Google and Facebook be the censors of the internet. We still want to believe that more information is better, right? But it does present challenges. I think a number of people are working on solutions to that effort that I think are really interesting around news literacy projects, beginning with students and younger people so that they do understand the content that they're consuming and the sources of the information that they're consuming, and particularly for journalists, for them to know how they're sourcing their reporting and that it's reliable and trustworthy and based in fact and solid research. And that, again, is something we try to emphasize in our program, and would be open to discovering new ways to support efforts in news literacy and understanding the sources of information. Along those lines, my organization, along with Democracy Fund, Knight, Hewlett, and others, joined forces to support scholarly research with Facebook into the impact that social media has on elections, which I think will be incredibly revealing, but again, just kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of really trying to understand what these new platforms and models are doing to our information consumption and how it's affecting communities. Yeah, I don't claim to have the answers there, but we're really interested in wanting to understand that space much more clearly and seeing where there may be opportunities for us to support efforts there.
You know, I want to pick up on Nick's comments. He gave the city council example, and if you'll indulge us for a moment, I want to sort of look to Dallas just for a moment now. I don't expect our panelists to be experts on the Dallas civic engagement and political space, but you know, one of my favorite expressions is that democracy is not a spectator sport. And as I think about that, we know that municipalities across the country face woefully low voting rates in those highly localized elections that arguably impact the life and well-being of individual voters immediately and most closely. As an example, in Dallas's last mayoral election, which is 2015, so we're in a crowded field of candidates right now, 9 candidates running for mayor. But 4 years ago, fewer than 6% of eligible voters in this community turned out to cast a ballot for the mayor of one of the country's largest cities. And so I'm wondering if you all, I guess, what connections, if any, can you draw between active civic engagement and these issues related to open government, press freedom, and freedom of information? I mean, are these, do those things enable better and more active participation in local, regional, or state politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that needs to be discovered is just doing more diligent research on like who are the people who aren't turning up, and then seeing like why, first of all, like why they aren't participating in this institution. Do they trust this institution? How has this institution treated them in the past? And do they really feel like their interests are being heard? They're feeling included in that. Groups that have historically never been engaged. So I think that's kind of important, and we support some more from like a newsroom lens on just audience engagement. Good ways to measure that, because I mean we're finding that community listening is tremendously important, and community listening isn't the noise that you hear on social. That tends to be louder than most human beings really are. I don't think most human beings speak with as much exclamation marks and caps lock as they
or emojis.
Or emojis.
Yeah,
I mean, supporting those sort of those tools has been beneficial to a lot of newsrooms. Not only just to like figure out like what are the stories people really care about, but the ones that are more likely to lead to subscriptions. And those aren't necessarily going to be the ones that get the likes or the shares and stuff like that. And I think for civic participation, a lot of that same things can be put together, but it's not necessarily going to be bombarding people with attack ads, because you have to give something, people have to have a reason to vote for somebody, not against somebody. And you have to sort of look beyond just the obvious metrics, and really engage and converse with those people and figure out why they're not engaged with that institution, and what the history of their community is with that institution.
Yeah, I think I haven't done an academic study on this, but it seems logical to me that you can draw a line pretty clearly from the decline in local media in communities to civic engagement. If people aren't aware of the issues that are affecting their local community because their paper closed, I think the UNC stat is that 20% of local papers have closed or merged in the last 15 years. That's pretty stark. So there are those news deserts that we know about and we're hearing more and more about. And then the result of that is often that small digital publications pop up and they're in the position of having to compete for clicks, and they're leaning more towards the, you know, trendy headlines and the national stories, and don't have the resources maybe to go find the local stories that would resonate in the community, and the emotional stories that people connect with about education and healthcare and housing and jobs that tend to be the things that motivate people to the polls. That's a challenge. I saw that even in my career with the pressure to publish stories and you know, publishing 5 stories a day, which I think the journalists in this room can laugh along with me that that's not really, you're not going to result in 5 quality stories when that's the expectation. I think one opportunity for this group and for this panel is to look for opportunities to make FOIA less intimidating and more accessible and help people understand. You know, I worked in journalism for almost 20 years. I didn't file one FOIA request ever. I don't know if any of my colleagues ever did. I'm sure some of them did, but it was few and far between, because the attitude was very much like, okay, if I'm going to be doing that, you're going to be okay with me not publishing or not getting my, you know, the expected clicks today. But I think we've heard encouraging examples, like Terry Muchler's example yesterday of ProPublica, that if you educate people and journalists on how kind of simple it can be and how fruitful and rewarding it can be to make this effort in the FOIA space, that it could help even those smaller outlets that are filling the news deserts or not, to try to take advantage of those opportunities and elevate issues that are the things people really care about, to try to inspire that engagement in civics and in their local communities.
So one more question before we open it up to the audience. I think it's fair to say, though I'm painting with a bit of a broad brush here, that traditionally philanthropy has been somewhat reluctant to engage in activities related to policy and advocacy, even when those issues are deeply related to the foundation's strategy, giving, and intended outcomes for a given community. And so you all have talked a bit about the work that your respective institutions are doing, but you know, I think many of us in this room recognize and would argue that your respective institutions, in fact, have taken leadership roles in this space, when much of the rest of philanthropy is sitting on the sidelines for fear of lobbying, for fear of crossing some perceived boundary around partisanship. So I'd love to just have each of you, and we'll actually start with Deirdre and then work down, to just share a little bit of that rationale and why you all are taking up issues that others, again, have largely sidelined and ceded to you, perhaps.
Sure. Well, you know, we're the Charles Koch Institute is an educational institution, so we're not engaged in lobbying, but the way we think about it is really looking for opportunities to work alongside partners who are working in the space, because we believe so deeply in the principles of free speech and its critical role in a functioning democracy. So our aim is to identify those opportunities and see where we can support those efforts. So, you know, NFOIC is a great example of that. You guys are the ones across the country at the federal level working on the issue from all sides. So we're going to rely on your expertise for how to support your efforts and hopefully look for new opportunities through this partnership and others to find other opportunities to get involved in that way. You know, our aim is to encourage an exchange of ideas in all forms and help. We do that through our education programs. We do that through different programs dedicated to civic engagement. We work with StoryCorps and a number of organizations on what we call courageous collaborations. The StoryCorps project is encouraging people to people of very different points of view to sit down and share their personal stories as a way to connect and relate and empathize. Just another form of the free expression work that we're interested in doing to try to encourage people to work across divides. FOIA is key to any efforts along those lines, because more information, we believe, is the sunshine that we've been talking about that can help, you know, shed light on issues, particularly the issues that we really work on: criminal justice, immigration, poverty, and foreign policy, and a few others. I can never remember them all at the same time.
Yeah, for us at Knight Foundation, I mean, the mission for us is quite clear. It's creating informed and engaged communities, and we believe that communities thrive when they have the best and most reliable information for them. When they have that reliable information in front of them, they can choose the best path for themselves. We're invested in the part where they get the reliable information in front of them. And from there, the community really has to decide on their own what their best path is. So we're going to do everything in our power to make sure they continue to get that locally relevant information in front of them, because we find that if you don't get that information, you might fixate on something that it's less likely to have an actual impact on your community, such as, I mean, on the national level, rather than actually bringing it back and speaking to your neighbor and having an exchange of ideas with your neighbor. So that's what we'll be focused on. I mean, that's what we're focused on, excuse me.
So I'm actually gonna tee up one more question that we hadn't talked about, but I want to see a quick show of hands in the room to get a sense of the audience, so forgive me as I hadn't participated earlier. So how many folks in the room are principally affiliated or associated with one of the state organizations? Okay, so the preponderance of folks in the room. How many would, and recognizing that there can be overlapping categories, how many are sort of active in media or journalism? How many academic folks and institution folks? Yep. Okay, so just to give us a sense as I'm going to throw you one last question. So I think there's a great opportunity for philanthropy locally, regionally, and nationally to be more engaged in these issues. So as you're thinking about this room and a mix of practitioners, what's one piece of advice you would give to them as to how to engage their local or regional philanthropic landscape in some of the issues that are most critical to what we're discussing today, and really investing in First Amendment challenges and open press, freedom of information, et cetera?
I would say demonstrate the clear link between members of your community. I mean, engage in a way that's relevant to them, and find a way to make sure First Amendment is absolutely relevant to their mission. For example, there's a tremendous, I'll take the Gates Foundation, for example. Large organization that does work all across the world. It's not principally a First Amendment or journalism organization, but they understand that the best vehicle for a lot of their work, if you want to do programs about health in Africa, the best vehicle to deliver that mission is through journalism. So they support that sort of reporting in Africa, where the market hasn't really supported that, because it's not the ones, those aren't the stories that are going to be valuable to the people who are likely to subscribe or are going to contribute to that. And always frame it, First Amendment, as an excellent vehicle for their mission for the community. I would say that's the most relevant thing when approaching local leaders and local funders.
I'll second all of that and just build on it a little bit specifically for this audience. I think you have a tremendous opportunity to, because FOIA is so broad and can apply to myriad different issues, I think a little bit of research for a funder into the issues that they're particularly passionate about, and maybe coming, with past examples or potential future examples where there may be opportunities to shine a light on an issue that they care about by filing specific FOIAs in specific districts, could be really appealing and frankly demonstrate value to them in a pretty unique way. If they're thinking about different opportunities to support, this would be a new original series of reports on an issue that is close to their hearts that they could come alongside and support. I always go back to my producer hat, but maybe it's a series of pieces and finding a local media partner or something, and demonstrating that value, but doing that little bit of research up front on the issues that they're particularly interested in, and maybe even finding out, I know from my organization, focus areas shift and evolve over the year or different cycles where the energies and resources are going to. So it could be as simple as making a phone call about what are going to be your priorities in the coming year, and then lining up FOIA requests alongside without compromising your principles as journalists. There are plenty of good, valuable stories to tell out there.
Just to add on that, a lot of local funders have a focus on justice, either criminal justice or topics in that area. Learn what they're sharing on their page, and show them the direct link of how FOIA contributed to that piece of information that they really value and they want to showcase, and make that clear link, because it's not obvious to a lot of people. I think the average, I wouldn't expect the average American to even know what FOIA is, but make that link explicitly clear.
So one just note for local context before I turn it to the audience for questions. I think North Texas is interesting in that we do have a history of bringing together journalists and philanthropies and others who care about issues that are that are both challenges and opportunities for this community. So there's another community and foundation in town that has a partnership with our local NPR affiliate, really focused on really living life on the financial edge. And so it's been this really remarkable series of stories over the course of the last couple of years that give light and context to the number of folks in our community that live paycheck to paycheck, that have full-time jobs and who are engaged productively in the economy and are one disaster away from ruin. And so it's been exciting to see that kind of collaboration across philanthropies and media and journalism. And within the context of the Dallas Foundation, we're a community foundation with 600 funds and 300 family donors that participate in our work at a tune of about $500 million in assets and annually about $75 million in grant making. And we too are a relatively small and lean organization in that we have to try to figure out how to be all things to our donors who have interests that might range from topics like these to education and health and economic mobility. And so increasingly we are trying to reach out and say, who are those anchor institutions in the community that have the content expertise, that are the data maven, and how do we think about networking our work together in a more strategic way so that we don't have to be the expert, but instead through strategic partnership, we can lean on these other institutions, which again, increasingly, media has been involved in that conversation here in North Texas, which I think is really a bright spot for telling the stories of our community more effectively. And our local newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, has been just a remarkable leader in that space as well. So there's my plug for the Dallas Morning News. If you're local in Texas and you don't subscribe, you should. I should also note that the former chairman, CEO, and publisher of the news is my immediate past chair, so advertisement over, but they really have been a remarkable steward of information and really empowering local civic engagement. So with that, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes, I think, for questions.
Yep. Before we do this, let me just ask a quick question to Deirdre and Nick. Thank you all very much for being here. This is a question about collaboration, and it's, one of the things that NFOIC is committed to doing, and that is, talking with other groups that are complementary or those that we can complement. And we're seeing that in your all space as well. I think about the News Challenge grant that you two organizations and two other philanthropies came together on. Can you just share with us a little bit about how you see that adding value to your all's organizations when you do that, and how that adds value to your mission and to those people who receive funding through those programs?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about Newsmatch. So for those who don't know, Newsmatch is a national matching gift campaign that we run with several other foundations to match donations to, I think the first year was like 54 nonprofit newsrooms, and then last year was, I think it was 158. And we do that through the Institute for Nonprofit News, which works as like a logistical partner. They select the organizations that can participate based on some rigorous standards. You need to have donor transparency, you need to have a corrections policy, you need to have a whole assortment of things. And so from November 1st to the end of the year, these nonprofit news organizations that have really sprung up in the last 10 years really work there to reach out to their regular readers and their regular contributors and have that incentive to like, hey, your donation will be matched by this organization. And we really like that program because it also, it builds a bigger muscle for soliciting donations. And we include it with training programs so that these nonprofit newsrooms have opportunities to learn and reinvent, because that is, I mean, the whole process is reinventing. You can't do the same thing over and over again. It's not going to stick. We know that now. So we really like that program because it builds that muscle. We can support a lot of organizations without a lot of having to do our own logistics. We can support one organization that spreads it out to a whole bunch of other organizations. And the other thing that we really like about it is that it's a very good plug and play capability, that a local foundation that, let's say, has a nonprofit newsroom that covers their community, they can plug in and play and say, like, I'm going to give this much to the nonprofit newsroom, and then we'll match that also. So there's a lot of ways for people to enter into it, whether you're just a small $5 donor or a local foundation that truly believes in the mission of your local nonprofit newsroom. So we're going to be running the 4th edition this year, and it's been tremendously successful, and it's one of our favorite programs because so many people can participate in it, either as a news organization or as a funder or just as a regular reader.
Yeah, so our philosophy with collaboration is key to our work. Our philosophy there is to find organizations that have a shared vision with ours, even if it's just on one issue. The Pointer Partnership is a great example of that. We have a totally overlapping vision on wanting to support journalism and free speech and free press. And they're, unimpeachable within the industry and social entrepreneurs in terms of raising this issue. So that's a great partner for us. We look at that across all of our work, though. We've worked with with the Anti-Defamation League and the Center for American Progress coming together to support communities overcoming extremism, the After Charlottesville Project, which was a discussion of how to address intolerance. That's another example of our desire to, bring together or join forces with a wide array of organizations who have a shared vision on a particular issue and topic, really to model that civil discourse that we are so passionate about and look for opportunities to amplify those examples and encourage that kind of discussion and debate and collaboration across society.
Justin Silverman from the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you all for being here. Deirdre and Nick, can you provide some guidance to all the local and regional organizations that are represented in this room? How can we get on the radar of your organizations beyond local and regional philanthropy, but speaking specifically to your organizations, how can we start making inroads, developing relationships, just having a conversation about how you can directly support us? Can you give us specific steps that we can take, some advice on what we can do beginning today to make that happen?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Candidly, this is a new area for me that I'm really just moving into at CKI, but I'm really excited about it. I don't speak in public often, so I don't know if I've been emoting as much, but it really means a lot to me. So I'm really genuinely excited to learn more about the space and learn more about the needs that you have and where we can support you guys. Dan has been a fantastic partner already with CKI. And I think this is a great way to do it, just to meet each other, learn where the gaps are in what you're doing, and start conversations with us so that we can see where there's overlap and what our strategies are in the space, and starting to brainstorm different projects and opportunities that we'd be happy to support. But this is the beginning for me, and I hope to get more involved in this area and really learn from all of you where we can support you.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, it's to the coalition. We're lucky you're all in the same room. Having a shared vision and then shared activities that we can all we all know together. But in addition to that, also understanding like where our existing investments are and understanding how the alignment with your work goes alongside that work, making sure there's a value add that you can bring to that work, as well as value add that they can bring to your work. Having a good understanding of that is very valuable. And then finding a way to consolidate the work. I mean, to understand that like New England Coalition is doing similar activities to the let's say Montana Coalition, having that sort of alignment and communicating that alignment is very valuable.
Can I just offer an adjacent remark? I think there is a mystique around philanthropy, and I will not speak for my friends and colleagues here, but I think you would be shocked at how willing someone from even a large national foundation is to jump on a call and learn about the work that you're leading. And I think that we as philanthropies do not do a very good job in sort of communicating that we can only most effectively do our work and move the needle if we are in deep and good partnerships with content experts and leaders that are on the ground. And so as a young fundraiser, what I found is the wild openness to philanthropy to have a conversation. At even Gates, Dell, Kellogg, Ford, some of the biggest philanthropies in this country are remarkably open to those exploratory conversations. And sometimes you just gotta literally call the main desk and get transferred in. I mean, sometimes it can literally be that easy to start to build the relationship.
Can I just, I just want one more follow, just to reinforce that a little bit. And it's such a great point that I have a journalism background. I have so many phone calls all the time, and I end them the way I ended all my reporting phone calls. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you? Which is usually when you get your best information, right? All the journalists in the room. But yeah, it's, as I say, I'm approaching this with a lot of humility, as you can tell, because it's a huge area and it's can be complex. But please reach out. If you have ideas, that's how I'm going to learn how it aligns with what we're trying to do. So I just wanted to put a finer point on that. Absolutely.
So this is in the same vein. I run the Colorado organization. It's more than a full-time job. Part of my job has to be raising money for my job. I'm working with journalists every single day in Colorado, in the biggest newsrooms to the tiniest newsrooms. But it's been very difficult to get a national organization like Knight to see us as part of the journalism, the local journalism infrastructure. So something like Newsmatch, when I'm trying to raise money at the end of the year, it would be wonderful to be able to have something like that to participate in, but apparently we don't qualify for that. How do we get the national organizations like Knight to see our state organizations as part of that local journalism infrastructure that's worth supporting?
So specifically for Colorado, I think the Colorado Media Project, which I understand you're a part of, is a good example. Like those, having a bunch of players come together it makes, it increases the star. I mean, it makes the star a lot brighter. So having all those players come together is tremendously valuable. And they don't necessarily have to be ones that are just in the freedom of information space. It can be your local news outlets, your radio station, nonprofit news organizations, and for example, the Colorado Media Project, that is something that we do notice, and we were just in Colorado a couple of weeks ago just to learn more about it. And we met with local journalists there to sort of expand it a little bit more, and it's something that we've paid attention to quite carefully because we see a lot of groups coming together and coming up with a shared vision.
I have a similar question to Jeff's, in that most of us in this room have gone for grants, and while it's always hard to get grants, it's easier to get a grant for a new thing, the one-shot project or the shiny new thing, than it is to ever get money for operating, just general operating expenses. And one of the ironies of that is sometimes you have the money for the shiny new thing, so you even have less time to just run your legal hotline or get your newsletter out, or whatever it is. And I guess my question is sort of, why is that? And is there any change in the philanthropy community to be a little more supportive of just the need to sustain what you're already doing and not just be attracted to the sexy new thing?
So a note related to that, I spent 18 years as a fundraiser having to, eat what I kill to run large national organizations. And the most frustrating conversation that I would have is to sit across the table from a philanthropy and to hear them talk about all the things that would be great if only you had X, Y, and Z, right? You need a program evaluation, you need this kind of impact study, and you say, great, we would love to put a proposal together for that, and then the next line is, oh, but we don't fund that. How many of you have had that sort of experience? I mean, and so I do think there is a bit of a reckoning in philanthropy that that we have to recognize that funding general operations of trusted partners and institutions has to be part of our strategy. And so in the context of the Dallas Foundation, what we have done is we've launched something called the Accelerator Fund. And the Accelerator Fund is for exclusively to do capacity building activities for trusted partner organizations. So it's the program evaluations, it's the legal helplines, it's strategic planning, it's the non-sexy things. It's not the shiny new program. And to both your question and the former question related to Colorado, I think the other opportunity, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists to answer as well, is as you're thinking about your communities, everyone always thinks about the large national foundations. We all think about the local or regional family foundations or private foundations, but also lean on your community foundation infrastructure. In Denver, the Denver Foundation has over $1 billion in assets, and community foundations themselves may have giving strategies, but what they also have is a collection of hundreds of individual donors. And what we have seen is that those individual donors, they may be a $10,000 giver or a $100,000 giver. that we as a community foundation can help scratch the itch around their philanthropic intent by putting them in touch with organizations like yours. And so it's not always the big institutional investor, but sometimes it's that individual donor that convenes around a community foundation that is more willing to fund the operations and to put in some intellectual and sweat equity into the work to help promote it. At least that's been one of the experiences we've seen here in Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, in my experience, the question I always have to ask is like, how do we know this activity will continue after the grant period? That's just something that I have to ask each time, because foundation missions change pretty regularly as times change. I mean, Knight Foundation, we have, for a long time, we supported endowments at universities. That's not something we do anymore as regularly, because the nature of journalism changed dramatically. So that's, in our experience, that's the one question that always need to be asked, and that's generally addresses the aversion to general operating support.
Yeah, I don't, I guess I'll just, I hear your frustration. I've heard it from other applicants, and it's a great question. I think ultimately it comes down to being able to demonstrate the value that you're creating with the project. And if the overall project, even if it's not the shiny new object, represents enough potential value to the funder, then they're going to want to fund the project at a level that would allow you to continue your operations. We don't tend to fund overhead because there's no ability to show a return on the investment for those line items usually. But I think if the project is demonstrably valuable, there's a way to work with funders to be able to support your operation while you're also demonstrating that value that the funders need to see on a particular project.
Hi, I'm Mike Tolhurst. I'm a colleague of Deirdre's at the Koch Institute, or Koch Foundation now. I analyze a lot of grants for a project, so I wanted to just jump in real briefly on kind of the general operating support question, because this is a question I've thought a lot about deeply as a grant analyst working at a larger foundation. I think one thing that like a lot of larger foundations, particularly at the national level, are concerned about is that they realize that they are kind of a big fish in some circumstances, and they want to be careful if they give something like general operating support. As Deirdre said, some of these foundation objectives or issue areas shift, and so if you become solely reliant on a sort of a small number of givers, particularly large institutional givers, that can leave some people high and dry. And I know as a grant analyst, what I'm always worried about, if it's a lot of general operating support, will our objectives shift in 5 years? And will they have not sort of looked to find those other constituents, other funders, maybe in their local community, or other stakeholders that have value in the type of work that they're doing, because they've become so reliant on our funding. And so I think that's something where, particularly when it comes to general operating support, that's a real concern as an analyst. We really want to be fair to our partners, you know, as we sort of enter into that relationship, that we're sort of setting people up for long-term success. So I think this is where like a lot of project-based funding, oftentimes, it's not that we never do general operating support, but to like a national funder project-based is very exciting, because then you're sort of thinking like, okay, like this is what they can do in addition after they've already got this kind of like core base of support. So I think it's just really challenging for a lot of local groups to look to large national funders that have these plans that maybe aren't as directly engaged in the community as being at the sort of cornerstone of general operating support. So I hope that's helpful and maybe responsive to a lot of the questions about general operating. And encourage Deirdre to jump in if she's got any additional.
I mean, and I think this is a common position that a lot of national philanthropies take, and I think this is, again, local and regional philanthropy have to step in to end the nonprofit Hunger Games, because that's what we're asking nonprofits across the country to do. We're asking them to compete for a limited amount of resources, where we want, you know, dollar for dollar to go into program, and we don't want to pay for rent or ED salary or all of these other things. And the recognition has to be that not every organization, not every nonprofit has an earned revenue model. That what we are investing in is a social good, an outcome, an impact for a community that is larger than what any one individual can create. And so I think, you know, again, so often, I'm new to philanthropy, I'm less than a year in. And I think that gives you a superpower of having fresh eyes when you come into, in my case, a 90-year-old institution that has largely had a single business model and strategy for those 90 years to say, how do we be better partners? And I hate to put the onus back on you all, but it's in those conversations with all of your local funders to say, the shiny project doesn't happen if we can't fund our basic overhead. That's the backbone, that's the infrastructure, that's what roots us in this community and makes us able to do our work. And I think if philanthropy hears that feedback enough, that especially local and regional philanthropy, there's a willingness to be a bit more responsive, and for us to be that anchor in supporting some of the operations in a way that then allows some of these big national funders to come in and be co-investors on the shiny thing, the new project. But that is a gap, and we have to end this culture of nonprofit Hunger Games, because we ask you all to do too much with too little, and then want you to report on it and measure it and tell us why you didn't hit some kind of metric or outcome. So I think we're at about time. Dan, do we have? Okay, great.
Hey, I'm Jeremy Borden. I'm an independent journalist, and I'm from Chicago, so appreciate you bringing up City Bureau, who I've worked for, and does some really excellent work in this space. So I guess I was a little bit disappointed to hear in terms of you guys talk about lobbying and saying, well, we don't lobby, you know, we don't necessarily engage in that way. And I think that in the FOIA space, either on the state or the federal level, you know, and there are plenty of media attorneys here who can speak better to this than I can, but you know, there is some real strength in these statutes. There are a lot of issues on the administrative end, and really, I think that anybody who cares about open government needs government to respond more transparently to statutes on the books, and that takes lobbyists. And so I would really challenge both of you or all of you to engage directly with government on behalf of on behalf of transparency and really enforcing the statutes that are on the books, many of which were passed in the 70s and, you know, possibly should be updated, because you know, journalists are not going to go lobby on their own behalf. We will for individual requests, but I think it's really up to the philanthropic space who are thinking long term to engage regularly. You know, most journalists and most people and most media attorneys know what the issues are. There's plenty of reports out there. I think a big part of what's missing is advocacy. And you know, I think that that's a place that you all could play a big role and should play a big role. If you don't want to do it directly, there are great organizations who do lobby, who you know, frankly don't have the resources to do it that well. So you know, I'd love to hear any response, and hope that you will take that, you know, seriously in the long term.
No, and I appreciate the comment. So I say we don't lobby because I work for the Charles Koch Institute, which is a C3, so we cannot lobby, but we have other sister organizations that are not C3s that are engaged in looking at policy options in the space and different ways to engage on that. Just to clarify that. My organization cannot, but there are other efforts that we support more along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, we're C3, we don't have a sister organization.
I think increasingly to your point, though, I do think philanthropies are understanding that you know, if we want to be catalytic capital and we want to help create, you know, change and outcomes, we have to be backed up by public resources, public dollars, and public policy. And so I do think while even a decade ago or even 5 years ago, big national philanthropies were frightened of the idea of even policy and advocacy work, that we've actually seen an uptick in the number of philanthropies engaging in policy and advocacy work. Because if we're making, $100 million in investment, we want that backed up by $1 billion worth of well-aligned public resources to sustain the work over time. So that issue of sustainability is real. And so I think for me, what's been interesting is sort of managing up to a board of directors for them to understand just how critical it is that there be an appropriate policy, a permissive policy environment for our investments to actually root and create longer term change and outcomes. And in philanthropy, that is a continued process of managing up to that board, shaking out of a very comfortable role that we've played as an arm's length distance from the work as a funder, and having a little bit more skin in the game. And again, I think we're seeing that vis-a-vis policy and advocacy, though most may not engage directly vis-a-vis lobbying or a lobby firm.
I'll try to be quick. The term nonprofit newsroom, I thought we all were, but I'm the editor of a small daily newspaper in South Carolina. The good news, we're family owned, we're independent. The bad news, we're family owned and independent. So we don't have a lot of resources. And I'm hearing about money that's out there available and matching funds and so forth, but we're kind of swimming in a void, or we're in a vacuum, whatever you want to say. And it'd be nice if there were some repository or something where we would be able to access, plus have help. I mean, I write editorials, I don't write grants, grant applications. So just wondering if we could channel that for everybody.
So how many of you are in, well, actually, that's irrelevant. Let me say this. Vis-a-vis philanthropy, another phase of philanthropy and iteration that we're seeing today is private foundations are making investments in private institutions. So historically, a foundation would tell you we can only invest in a 501c3. So if you have a profit motive, we cannot invest. Well, in fact, the IRS for generations, for decades, has allowed us to make investments in private institutions that have a public good. And an example that we're seeing here in Dallas and across the country is big national foundations actually leveraging their philanthropic assets to make investments in private companies and institutions that promote a public good. And so that's called an impact investment. And sometimes that's through the form of working capital, where it could be a low interest or no interest loan. In other cases, it's just an equity disbursement into the private institution, so long as you are focused on whatever ladders up to that foundation, civic engagement, or you're covering series related to race and equity, whatever the case is. So and again, increasingly there are philanthropies that are making those bets because we recognize that we need tri-sector collaboration. We need the nonprofit sector, the private sector, and public institutions to be aligned to create really big outcomes for communities. So I'm happy to, afterwards, I'll hand you a card, and I'm happy to sort of be a thought partner with you and really to anyone in the room, because there are just so many interesting ways in which philanthropy can stretch beyond what we've done for generations to meet some of these urgent needs.
And just on another note, are you plugged into Lion already? The local independent online news publishers? Okay. Talk to me afterwards.
And I'll just put in a plug for our fellowship, which supports journalists at organizations across the country. We'd love to support a fellow at your organization.
Yeah, Report for America is also a terrific program that, what did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Report for America is another great organization that we announced an investment in them specifically to support organizations such as yours to bring in more staff, younger staff, to specifically for organizing. I mean, I need to learn more a bit about it, obviously.
I'm on the advisory board. You should check them out.
Yeah, they're great.
Thank you all.